I think I might be zeroing in on better understanding of what the Nephilim word means now, or Nephilim, because I've looked at 3 lineages in the early chapters of Genesis. Genesis 1, Genesis 2, and the end of Genesis 4, which begins with Seth, and decided that it might be possible to determine who the Nephilim are by a process of elimination, and a process of trying to understand the ways that the term has been misapplied. There are these 3 lineages who share many common names between them. They're between the 10 names from Adam to Noah in the chapter 2 creation, and the 10 names from Adam to Noah in the chapter 1 creation, with the break between 9 and 10 on Cain's side, because there's no genetic link between them, and that Noah is just sort of chosen because he finds favor. There is a lot of commonality between the names. They both begin with Adam and end with Noah, and they've got 2 other ones common in the middle. But the Enoch, who's 3rd on one line, is 7th in line on the other, and the Lamech, who is about 7th in line on one, is 9th in line on the other. So they're not the same ones, and the Lamechs have different characters. So the 4 out of 10, 8 of those 20 are the same name, and some other ones succeeding each other on Cain's side are very similar names. Now in the Seth lineage, you've got just Seth and Enosh, which is the same name as in the early part of the Genesis 1 creation, Seth and Enosh. So 2 and 3 in line there, and here they're 1 and 2. But they are separated by a large span of years, because it's been many generations until Eve has her second son, and I've got a video on that. She's probably something like 1,200 years old or more when that Seth is born, or the other Seth is much earlier in time. So there's 2 Adam to Noah lines, and then there's a Seth and Enosh line, which gets cut short because it's just before the flood, as I interpret it. And if you assign the term sons of God to the late coming Seth line, because they are from Elohim, sons of Elohim, and Elohim appoints that man Seth as the son of Eve, then the other line, that produces the daughters of men, the only line that has men and women created in that one lineage, and the only line that makes daughters available for the people of the other 2 successions to marry, that one has 10 people through it. And it can be easily assigned to the one that has the daughters of men, because it's the only line that has daughters. The other 2 lines being made up of divinely conceived of male gods. So they have all males until the very end of the line with Cain, where he has 1 daughter. So one line is plainly the daughters of men line. Now if we assign the term sons of God to the late coming Seth line from chapter 4 of Genesis, then that leaves Nephilim to be assigned to the Cain line. And there are some reasons why this would make sense, although there is no straightforward, clear origin of the word that gave rise to the term Nephilim, because there's usually an association with the verb nafal, which just means to fall, including to be born and give birth and other meanings. But that word does not obviously sound the same as Nephilim. It's nafal, and it's not spelled quite the same either. Now this is similar to the way people argue on similar questions these days, having to do with the denial of life and the denial of the means of reversing aging and being eternally young, which is at the heart of the Genesis 6 problem as well. And what happens there is you have these multiple false assumptions or imperfect definitions that make people have assumptions about what the other group means when they say something, which aren't true. So in these 3 lineages, you have a total of 8 plus 4, 12 duplications of names. It's symbolic cloning, really. And other names that are very close and vary only slightly, like Jabal and Jubal. So 12 of a possible 22 generations worth of these lineages have the same names. So when you refer to say Adam, you don't know whether it's Genesis 1 Adam or Genesis 2 Adam. And all the way down the line, when you say Seth, you don't know whether it's Seth who was from the daughters of men line or from the sons of Elohim line, sons of God line. And that creates an enormous amount of confusion that makes these passages difficult to interpret. And once you start working your way through that, I think it seems to get a little easier. The interpretation of the word fall could be there like other possible meanings of the word Nephilim, because by misspelling or making the word ambiguous, you bring in various other interpretations and meanings that do apply to the line of Cain. It may not be strictly correct to call them fallen, but Cain is one of the first people associated with falling in the Bible. Adam is made to fall asleep when Eve is made from him, and Cain's countenance falls when the Lord catches him after he's killed Abel. And Cain might also be associated with being a giant when he is born under divine conception, and therefore doesn't age, and therefore could be expected to be taller than other people who age, because when people get toward old age, they shrink a little bit, and also if people have no limit on their lifespan, they might grow a little bit through their lifetime and end up over a long period of time being taller than other people. Now, this would apply to Seth's line as well, in that they are divinely conceived, as I interpret it, by the different division of the deity or different deity Elohim, and they would also grow big, but they don't have the same history as Cain, which might have led to him getting the mark because of him murdering his brother and having to be protected against other people's vengeance for it. Vengeance could also be something the Israelites were thinking of when they're going to enter the promised land, and their spies come back and say, we shouldn't fight these people because the sons of the descendants of the Nephilim are there. Now, if they carried the history of Cain, or if they knew the history of Cain, they might justifiably be afraid, because anyone who tries to hurt Cain has vengeance taken on him that's multiple times worse than the offense. So they might think that divine retribution would come upon them if they fought the descendants of the Nephilim in the promised land. Now, the conflict in Genesis 6, I think, begins, and you can see it in the way that the lineages play out, because of the balance and where the women choose to go in marrying. In the beginning, Cain has no one to marry because his family produces nothing but divinely conceived products of a male god and their descendants. So everybody born in Cain's line is male, so obviously they have to marry outside the line. And that is the line that has the daughters of men in it, the Genesis 1 creation. So at first, Cain has nobody to marry, and he has to go the other way. But at the end of the line, after you've gone down 10 generations and you get to Noah, Noah doesn't have any children until he's 500 years old. And his previous generations have their first children at about 180, which is still a lot older than the men who came before them. And this might be because the people from their line of descent, from their creation, women at least, are seeing, hey, we can go and marry these guys from Cain's line first, and then Seth's line, because they are passing on agelessness to their children. So that's a big advantage. I don't want to marry over here when I can go over here and have ageless kids. So at first, when this is happening, presumably, between the Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 creation people, there's no fuss about it. There's no claim by the narrator that men are all thinking of nothing but evil and the whole world's corrupt. That doesn't happen until after Seth comes onto the scene and there's Elohim and YHWH competition. This is implied because it's said at the end, right after Seth and Enosh are discussed as having been born, that people are starting to call upon the name of the Lord. This has multiple possible meanings. It could mean that they're out preaching, proclaiming his name. It could mean that they're praying and asking for favors from YHWH, but it could also mean that they're calling him out, complaining about him, taking his name in vain, because now there's competition. Now they can go over to this other god. And the preaching and the calling upon and all these other things are a product of competition. So that's after that point where Seth and Enosh come on the scene, and now the daughters of men potentially have someone else to marry. They got two choices if they want their children to not age. And at this point, they might start saying, oh, sorry, Cain, there's a new guy in town, a new set of guys, we're going to go over and marry them. And that could be why you see Cain's lineage come to an end, just at the point where the lineage starts to talk about the birth of Seth and Enosh. And there's no more Cainites after that are born. There's one daughter, and that brings an end to the whole line. And the Noah that presumably is on their side when the flood comes is someone just chosen because he finds favor in the eyes of the Lord. It's not chosen for his genetic purity like the Noah on the other side from the Genesis 1 creation is, because he's perfect in his generations. So it seems that this competition plays out, and then that's what leads to the big loss of life and the withdrawal by YHWH of agelessness from the human population, from at least the one line, the Genesis 1 creation, because he says, my spirit won't strive with man forever because he's flesh. That means that there are fleshy people out there, as I interpret it, who won't die of old age unless YHWH intervenes and does something to change the way people reproduce and live. But he seems to do it only to the Genesis 1 line. And this is where the difficulties come in interpreting interaction with angels and so on. Because by saying that these people are flesh, and I'm not going to let them live forever, since they're fleshy beings, that precludes them from being angels. It means that they are physical beings by that interpretation. Also, all these interpretations don't look, when trying to define what a son of God is, at what the number one son of God had to say about sons of God. This is especially bizarre because some people who were supposed to be Christians are interpreting this whole thing without looking at what Jesus said about it. And if you want to say that angels came down and married humans, then you have to look at a passage, I think, in Luke 20:36. It says that the sons of God are a term applied to men who lived righteously and have passed into the spirit realm when they die, but they are set aside to be resurrected when that time comes. And in the meantime, they are not married or given in marriage. And they are like or equal to the angels. So anything where you want to bring in angels as an explanation, you could use sons of God, righteous men, just as easily. But you don't need to in the best interpretation, apparently, because when YHWH withdraws life from people, he's speaking of flesh beings. So there's a lot of interpretation here that's a lot of narrow views of specific passages that doesn't take into account what other people are doing. So everybody's got a little piece of the puzzle, but because of the commonality of names and the lack of one set definition, really, of what Nephilim is, then that creates all the confusion. In terms of it being a giant, that could apply, but between giant and fallen, that applies only to Cain's line. They are both potentially giant if they're living really long and having a lot of time to grow, and they're fallen because of the association with the word fallen, referring to the way Cain has a look on his face after murdering Abel. Seth's line could be called giant, but they wouldn't have that fallen association to them. There's also the idea of the fall of man in chapter 2, when Adam and Eve are kicked out of the garden, as being the beginning of everything that goes wrong in the Bible. But when someone says that that sin entered the world through Adam, it might not necessarily refer to that Adam. It could be the one in the Genesis 1 creation. And also, that discussion draws attention away from the really catastrophic nature of the loss of lifespan and loss of life that happens just before and at the flood. compared to what happens in the Garden of Eden story. The Garden of Eden punishment is like a slap on the wrist for humanity compared to what happens in Genesis 6. So there's a lot of confusion and diversion away from what I think should be the main point of the Genesis 6 story, because it's set up in such a way that it can refer to so many different people. When you say that the Nephilim were on the earth when the sons of God went into the daughters of men and had children by them, that sets up all these possibilities for different marriages and different matings and who's having the children, who's adopting them. And you have to look at a number of them, really, I think, to get the whole picture.